economics, your PhD thesis was on bundling economics, and our work in a much less rigorous form shows there are real economic upsides to bundling. And so we get a rebundling both from economics, but also for the consumer, because to Jean's point, less confusion.
Yeah, and I won't disagree with Laura. This is terrible because I want to. I really want to. No. But the winner of the social media and all that usage in young people is absolutely correct. That's why we have these huge ad-supported, dominated, free platforms that broadband has benefited the consumer with. Now, I would question the word free because the advertising, we're giving them a lot of information for free so that we can get their content. But that time spent, we have grown our amount of screen time. There are losers in traditional media. I would just argue it hasn't been the long-form TV series or movies. That has multiple platforms and the demand for that, and people's time is spent either sitting down with some sort of content that is immersive, and you make a commitment to it versus this quick content and very short form, not medium short form, very short form. But you could spend hours there on lots of quick little dances or whatever. There's a middle that has lost that we don't spend time on. And it used to be a bunch of cable TV channels on like number 155 of something. I don't know. We haven't stopped paying for that yet for those 70% people who still buy a cable bundle. But there'll be a middle there that somehow starts to disappear.
UGC, so the professional versus user-generated content, how do you see that playing out over the next 4, 5, 6 years? Is that, Tom, I mean...
Oh, how do I see it playing out? Yeah, I'm not a good one to ask this. I watch the professional. I guess that's not correct. I am a fan of YouTube, but for, instructional videos that tell you how to put gear oil in your boat. So yeah, it's a lively competition. I don't see one becoming dominant. There's certainly room in the space for expansion in all directions, and also for consolidation. And there have been entry and exit, and that's also part of fairly vibrant space. So I think that the vertical integration that happened in the old cable market slash telco carrier market, has been not extraordinary, but in fact predictable. Although if we were here 15 years ago, some of us were, I think, not quite maybe. But at any rate, the topic would have been a la carte cable TV pricing. And why do you have to pay for channels you don't watch? Which is a mischaracterization of the bundling model and the pricing system thereby used. But the fact is that we have gone away from that, and we have all these different services now. And I enjoyed it, Mike, when you said I have 7 or 8 of these. Yeah, I don't know the exact number I have either. I would like to know. I have to do an audit to try to find out how many I'm paying for. So yeah, it's going in that direction. But the point is, it is fragmented, and we're getting a lot of different competition. We have more choice in that sense. That's what people said that they wanted. A lot of the regulators certainly, and critics of the market. But it seems natural that there would be both consolidation and retraction, but also competing systems. I don't know that there is a wipeout coming for professional content, because user-generated media, which has obviously been around for 15, 20 years now in a very important economic way. I think that is lives side by side with what you're seeing, as I say, the platinum era of Hollywood.
Jean, did you want to jump in on that? We were talking about the TikToks we get from our kids last night.
Yeah, it's really hard. When we talk about media, we use this blanket word, media. Social media is media, but that's not really created content. Yeah. So we're blurring the lines here when we talk about media. So I don't think it's an either or, and I think it's too broad to say user-generated versus professional. They're different use cases. They're different things we're doing. We've just put technology platforms in the middle that allow us to have more of these interactions with strangers, not just our friends. But I don't consider them, they're different use cases. And yes, media is part of how we spend our leisure time, but we're going to continue to do it in both ways, in my view. And again, sometimes we can say the golden age of Hollywood and all that. There's lots of Hollywood and content creation in long form that's not necessarily just this public company. Like, it's not whether or not CBS is going to be successful or not. There's tons of artists and independents and production studios that are not under some of these big umbrellas. There's independents and the Reese Witherspoons and all of this. So we have to look at the aggregate of it. It's not, Laura and I will turn it into public companies that we then invest in or not, but that's not the end-all, only place media exists.
Yeah.
And I would disagree with Jean and say that I think they're exactly the same, because what they are is defining leisure time allocation. And when you look demographically, there's a very clear shift towards user-generated, probably because it's cheaper and they don't have a credit card, the kids under 18 or 21, so they use their time that way. But that is exactly how consumer habits start. At 13, how do you behave? At 15, at 17. And maybe you use your parents' Netflix account, but really, the only people watching TV are like over 40. So I think that is a consumer behavior that just dies over time. But these other consumer behaviors where you're using more and like for different reasons, like master class or these online activities, I think these user behaviors do not change for these people that get them. And therefore, it really is directly comparable leisure time. And I would call media like leisure time. That's what I would call it. So I do think they're directly, and I think one of the big assumptions I'm making is that money follows time over decades. So slowly, YouTube just reported $7 billion of advertising revenue. We're saying they're going to be $35 billion this year. Like, that's a significant number now, YouTube. Now, admittedly, it's global, but the point is money over time very slowly does catch up with time spent. So, as I say, I think they're directly comparable because they compete for consumer time, and the money follows time. So they will take money away from professionally produced content.
Okay. That's the interesting thing for me as I watch my daughter in particular, who is perfectly willing to give away her intellectual property in exchange for likes and follows and not requiring any compensation on the back end.
Yep.
And I wonder the most recent question is, will the economics of this business give individual social media content creators enough compensation to create and survive, or is the professional creation model still needed?
Well, I'll start with this.
Yeah.
I'll start with this one because one of the things all of the FANGs have in common, and in this case I'm talking about the big powerful Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, power asymmetry. Really different from old media. In old media, Comcast had power and Disney had power, and they did a contract. And every 5 years when the contract from somebody got thrown off their air. But then they always figured it out. It was a negotiation of equals. That is not the new world. The new world is let me call it content creator has no power. And the platform has all the power. And I'll just use Twitch. So Twitch is by far the 90% used video game platform. Microsoft decided they wanted to compete, and they bought 5 of the top 10, paid them a fortune to come over to the Microsoft platform, which at the time was called Mixer. Didn't work. Consumers didn't move. They stayed on the Twitch platform, and within 18 months, Microsoft wrote off their investment and essentially went into a JV with Facebook. So I think the platform has all the power, and they don't have to pay the content creator.
Which is very interesting, right? I mean, it's different, I would argue, than what we've seen in the past, where the content is where you had the power.
Yeah.
You either get the latest Disney show or not, and if I can't get it here, I'll go elsewhere. What you're saying is, in this new world, the platform dictates, and the content will follow.
Because they have the consumers.
Yeah.
The value is the consumer
Well,
traffic.
there's the network effect of these
Yeah.
platforms that is, people aren't going to go recreate the networks unless, it's something new and different. So it does have to be.
Like TikTok.
Like TikTok. So it has to be a different type of content that causes me to then add that to my repertoire of apps. And my time spent may shift over time, et cetera. But I think the difference, though, is we can talk about it's enabled lots of people to be content creators. Mm-hmm. The reality is, in these environments, no single one of them are really that important. So you just have to sit there and say, well, it is inequality because the platforms have enabled so much content creation, but it's that volume of it from lots of different content creators that no 3 or 5 of them are that important to change the value of going to that platform. But they also, those content creators would have never had a place to create that content in the old world.
That's true.
Right.
So
There was a gatekeeper.
there was a gatekeeper, and if you didn't have the right connections and you didn't get put on the, so there's this openness and freedom, but yeah, they don't have power.
Yeah, let me just take a different tack on this. There is obviously structural changes happening all the time in the media industry, and one of the things that I've looked at recently, 1948 was the Paramount antitrust opinion, one of the most important antitrust cases in history. And the actual decrees were, the decrees went to movie studios that influenced or had some other control over distribution, theater exhibitions. And so the basic order is known for ordering vertical divestiture, that the major studios couldn't own theaters. Other aspects to it I won't go into. Those decrees were in effect until 2020, 72 years later. And then they were, the Justice Department went to federal court and said they're no longer needed, and the court agreed, and they ended in 2020. In 2021, very interestingly, Paramount had a picture that had taken years to create called Coming to America 2. And it was set for theatrical release the end of last year. COVID obviously was a tremendous impediment for the release of this feature film. And so Paramount, the owner of the film, turned around and sold it to Amazon for $125 million. And Amazon put it out online in March. Now, as I'm telling you this is already old information. We've already integrated this kind of release. We've moved on to several other lawsuits since. But the point is that this is now the new vertical integration in exactly the same space in the virtual or cyber world that is now developed. And we have Amazon, in fact, since these events happened in March, making a bid for MGM, a studio, to vertically integrate that professional platform, in the terms we're talking here, for media, to bring that into the platform, the Amazon Prime platform. And I think there's obviously a lot of efficiency in that integration, and we're seeing a lot of it. We'll see a lot more. At the same time, it is not excluding the rise of some of these more independent approaches. In fact, it is funny to see Variety and Hollywood Reporter try to veer around the term studio these days. And, what does Reese Witherspoon have? We shouldn't have a studio. She has an ability to create content. And it's just sort of, we have to come up with new terms for all these contractual relationships that are being formed and then marketed and, sold to try to facilitate media creation. And it encompasses, user-generated content. It obviously encompasses professional content, and it's playing out. The Paramount case ultimately was a failure by the economic evidence. It did not improve competition, and movie creation actually went down. A lot of that was the 1950s. Television came in, but actually that doesn't explain the whole thing. The actual vertical disintegration mandate was not helpful for consumers or efficiency, and over a long time we've actually gotten away from that, and now you see lots of vertical integration in today's world.
Well, we were talking about this yesterday. Services need content. They need content to be in the service, right? Or we're not going to pay the subscription fee or the bundled fee. But I would argue here, it's clear anybody who's running a service, they can contract and buy individual programs from a producer or another studio, or they can make it themselves. Disney has had a studio internally for years producing stuff, but that doesn't prevent ABC from also buying content from Warner Brothers. And at the end of the day, it can be owned And that studio, if they're not getting the best consumers for their content, the widest audience possible, they're not monetizing it correctly, it will find that home in another way, whether it's through divestment or contracts selling it to a competitor, because content needs to have the broadest audience possible to be successful. And if management teams are failing to do that internally, it's not generating enough cash flow through that subscription because that content isn't for that audience, it'll find a different way to get there, or the management teams will be held to that by their shareholders or their stakeholders. So
I'm perfectly willing to disagree with this. What I think happens next is, the reason I think every old media company loses is because Jean and I have been colleagues for like 25 years, and her whole analysis is if content stays in the old world. I think what's new over the next 10 years is that Amazon and Apple can create money-losing exclusive content to sell more phones, to do something different and not have to make money on content, because they have alternate profit centers. So right now, you brought up Disney, they're losing only $200 million on their streaming activities last quarter, down from $500 million the year before. And guess what? They're staying afloat because they have theme parks and they have consumer products. That is what's about to happen I think, to old media. They're gonna bring down the returns on capital in all old media, and they're going to subsidize it by e-commerce or iPhones or search engines or social networks, and they've got these sort of infinite deep pockets that they can make content a money-losing activity for as long as they want, because they all have huge free cash flow, and they have consumer traffic. So if they bring joy to their consumers and it keeps consumers engaged on their websites longer, they can make money from their core business. And I think that's that's why the old media guys become money-losing operations. They can take exclusive content knowing they're losing money, and just make the money in a different way by differentiating their core product.
Well, they definitely can make money in a different way. They can do it purely advertising, like Google does through YouTube, or they can do it through selling whatever that e-commerce is, they're selling around it. But if it's not generating faster growth in that other area of business, then they're just losing money to lose money. So, and I would say that it does have to have a rationale that they're monetizing it in some way, in some time frame, or it'll eventually be stopped because it has no value. I mean, Amazon doesn't want to just shut down content creation. That's not their goal. And the content creators, they want to be seen. So if consumers aren't watching it in that forum, they're going to go somewhere else eventually. I mean, checks do get you onto Netflix. But at the end of the day, they're going to want to, be seen. So I don't know. We disagree a bit. I just think, I'm not saying the monetization has to be in the old way, just for that piece of content, but they have to monetize it incrementally.
Well, could I just quickly say that, the argument, the government's case against Paramount was analogous to this, that they would force bad movies on theaters through block booking and through their own ownership of the theaters, but the theory was poor, and that is to say, you don't make up bad investments on volume. And just because you have some other way to monetize it, another product to sell customers, if it's a bad product and they're not willing to pay the incremental cost of it, you're not. That's probably a losing strategy. But if I could interject, with all due respect, Michael, at this time in every media panel in the United States, there is a rule that Section 230 must be discussed. You're all aware of that rule. It's a hard one, and so. You have a piece in the Harvard Business Review talking about reforming 230. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy. I'm as a moderator, I guess I'm supposed to be moderate, but if I can take that hat off for a second. I mean,
controversial.
In the HBR, Marshall Van Alstyne and I argued that we created these safe harbors, both in 230 and in 512, during a time where we really wanted to make sure that the social media, the FANGs, and the other social media platforms were going to be able to survive. I'm not sure we're in that world anymore. And I wonder whether we need to revisit that balance that the lack of accountability on the platforms, I think, really shifts the balance of power away from the content creator and towards the platform in ways that are bad in both traditional media and in user-generated content. That was the essence of what we were arguing in the HBR piece, is that these laws might have made perfect sense in 1996. We're not in 1996 anymore, and they deserve to be revisited. I think we're going to talk more about that in the context of Section 230 tonight, but in the context of the CDMA and 512, I'm really concerned about how the safe harbor shifts the balance of power away from the rights holder and toward the platform, where the platform can dictate a lot of things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to dictate at the expense of the rights holder. And this is the way most of my classes end, in stunned silence. So I'd be happy to talk more about that, but one thing that occurred to me as we were talking about the FANGs is the FANGs are actually incredibly different in both their founding and their business model. If we pivot towards the last part of the panel, which is winners, losers, and policy, should that come into play as we look to how we, or whether we regulate these very, very powerful platforms? Laura?
Okay. So it's my point of view that what the FANGs have in common is billions of consumers use them on a daily basis, so they're global. They have power asymmetry, where what they aggregate has a lot less power, so if you leave the FANG, you just don't get seen by the 2 billion people today that use them. Huge free cash flows is another thing they have in common. And they have really excellent tech people, actually tens of thousands of the best tech people on earth, which means, my opinion, not only is government slow, but no matter what government does, usually it hurts the smaller guys that only have 5 smart guys in the back office. It doesn't help the guys that have 500 engineers that they can throw at any problem to do a workaround. And businessmen too. I mean, it's not just engineers, but there's a bunch of really high quality people in the staff. Like, I don't care what you do to Amazon, they will outsmart you. They are just the smartest commercial entity in America right now. So I think, so my opinion is that I think that the FANGs, I think it's very hard to beat them, and I do not see their competitive advantages waning because of what they have in common. I also think Jean would agree, we do not demand, our cost of capital for them is much lower than old media and their competitors. So they don't compete in my world on Wall Street on the same basis as old media. That's another reason old media loses, because Jeff Bezos loses, that's not him anymore, but Amazon loses a ton of money. Who cares? No one cares. We don't demand them make money. Their cost of capital is much lower. So a big, huge asset is a much lower cost to them. And that's going to be true of all the FANGs, in my opinion, because they're globally scaled and unstoppable.
Go ahead, Jean.
No, I think this is such a big topic, it's so hard to narrow it down. And the reality is all of the FANGs are so very different. We're talking about e-commerce, advertising, search. I mean, it's just, it's very different. So, an Apple is an operating system.
Facebook, Amazon,
Yes, sorry.
Google, and what's the other one?
Apple?
And Apple.
And
Those
Apple?
four.
Those four.
We're
really
getting rid of Netflix.
We're throwing
And
out
yeah,
Netflix.
we're throwing out Netflix,
We're
but you
gonna
can't
need
say
no
FANG
acronym, but
without
okay.
Netflix,
Yeah.
though. You're just saying
FANG.
No, we're not going to say that.
Politically correct, we need to leave Netflix.
We need to leave
Acronym.
Netflix in. But I mean, again, Netflix looks more like old content. It's
Yeah,
just
it
delivered
does.
over broadband.
That's true.
So actually, that's the one that already has a competitive system of old players. But Apple's completely different. We can go on a whole different discussion of what you would be regulating Apple. They're an operating system with a device that's a duopoly between Android or Apple, but that gives them a platform called the App Store. But I think the bigger issue is, what are we regulating? Which of these areas are we thinking we have an issue with? We have to define that first. We're not just regulating big. I'm sorry. They're big and they have cash flows. They're also one of our best global exporting businesses as from the US. I mean, content creation always has been one of our best global exporting. Our tech capabilities, I mean, we're this is opening up the world in lots of ways the U.S. Advocates for. So the fact that they're big and generate a lot of cash flows, and in theory could do all these things with, good or bad, is not a reason to regulate. So we have to just decide what is it that we're trying to achieve and regulate. I would kind of throw out there the asymmetry issue under 230, that those rules should be defined better. Traditional media had watchdogs. Now, granted, once you're in cable, you could do a lot of things, but there were rules around content. And when we've taken the public square out into the world and given it a megaphone, what is the person on the wrong side of that supposed to do? Go sue all these little individual people? I mean, it just doesn't work. And so that issue of bringing content, and having nobody be responsible for it, no editors at all, is a big question I would put to all of you. Leveling that playing field is something we should be thinking about. I'm not saying it's the responsibility of the platforms to be editors, but somebody should revisit that and figure out what the rules should be in the world as it is today.
And today, it's the sole responsibility of the rights holder to say, I need to take this down, this down, this down, this down, and very little, I would argue, and without variance here, you can yell at me later, but I would argue very little incentive for the platforms.
But again, to the point that there are, again, we make it US only, free speech. By the way, these are global platforms. There isn't free speech rules around the world. But if we're going to use that rationale and the rules of free speech, who's responsible for monitoring that when that free speech crosses the line? So the individual who's hurt by that has no real place to go.
Right.
Except suing somebody for slander or libel or whatever, which is a really difficult process. And it doesn't solve anything. There's another one here, another one here, another one there. So I do think that the lack of editors and branding and journalistic requirements, there's no FCC monitoring that, there's no oversight. That is something that there probably does need to be thought about. I don't have the answer, but I think there does need to be thought there. But regulating whether or not you can own part of this vertical, I don't think it works. It hasn't proven to ever work. All it does is create whatever is regulated to be one small part of the media system, and people go around it.
Yeah.
And I think competitively, there's enough competitors here that'll figure it out. And
Well, so Anonymous is again asking us to answer that question.
Tom.
Oh, Tom, I'm sorry.
Well, to answer your question, yes. I mean, these firms are, very, very different entities, and but they do share one obvious characteristic, and it is exploitation of economies of scale. And and by itself, that's efficiency. That's no question about it. That's efficiency. Now, there's more to it, but we are seeing, obviously, in a new industrial age, tantamount to the rise of tremendous economies of scale that arose from social improvements in transportation and communications in the 19th century. And really, transportation and communications now are really driving these gains today, the internet and the way we can move information, bits around the world, and create tremendously valuable, zero marginal cost products. And so every one of these platforms gets on that. And of course they're different, and they evolve, and they're different from each other. They're different from each other themselves. Okay, look at Apple. I mean, I love the Apple example because you go back to 1997 and read Steve Carlton's very nice book on Apple. It reads like an obituary. And, it was how Apple failed. That's not what he called it. But Apple's view at that point was it was okay to be a niche producer, okay? And the model was Honda. Honda had a good car, and it charged a 10% premium. Right. And that was fine. And Apple could be small and have these problems and that problems, those problems. And then they got into the next century, and it was iTunes and iPhone and the App Store and a reconfiguration of this to capture now these extremely powerful economies that have made it, really a completely different enterprise in capture, in terms of the scale it has. And of course, all of these firms have faced competitors along the way, and Facebook was behind and faced off MySpace, and MySpace didn't do it. They were there first. Barnes & Noble was there first, and had a predatory campaign against Amazon. That's a cute little historical vignette. The CEO of Barnes & Noble wanted to call their website Predator, to knock out the young whippersnapper, and he threatened Amazon that they would be toast.
News Corp bought MySpace. So like,
Oh yeah, well,
so that worked, right? That was dominance.
exactly. Vertical integration's not a magic bullet. That's
not a
right.
magic bullet.
And even deep pockets. So yeah, no, all of these things are evolving in time, and of course this makes antitrust has to be tailored for every subject. But all these other regulatory challenges that come in each section of the law has to actually address the particular problem.
One of the things that's popped up a couple times in the questions is live sports. We haven't talked about live sports and rights to major sporting.
Don't get me going. I live in Denver and haven't had Nuggets or
Well, I was going to talk from the perspective of
Avalanche
Steelers, so we
as
can
a
talk from
viewer.
Denver.
Like, no, I mean, because
But what's the form of the question that's being asked?
It's flowed off, but I guess one thing is, should we be at all worried about how these rights to live sporting events are being allocated? Is there a regulation? Are you, Gene, concerned about your ability to watch the Nuggets and the Rockies?
I find it amazing that there's no way around this in the way that consumer can have access to content anywhere. But there's so many old rules in rights sales. And so if they already have contracts and things where they're selling to DirecTV, for instance, and then Comcast doesn't want to buy it, well, you're stuck as a consumer between this negotiation of these. There's no other place to get it. You're not allowed to buy it anywhere else. So you're not even given the choice. I have to cancel everything I buy here, my broadband, my bundle, my everything through Comcast. In theory, I'd have to go buy a subscription with DirecTV to watch it. So obviously, it's out there illegally. So now we all get it for free. Great. I don't think my cable bill went down. But I get it for free, but it's shitty. Sorry, pardon my French. It's an illegal stream. We're watching it on a laptop. So the consumer's not happy, but the consumer has nowhere to go or anything to do with it. Now, what is that regulation? Is that not? No, actually, that's contract law, I believe. So this is private companies who created these contracts, and now they're stuck trying to figure and work them out. But
Right. This is a great example undermining your prior argument of how content wants to be free and economically it's going to be available to everybody because that's the Beck economic model. Here's an example in your own house where you can't get it and you would pay for it. So
And
content isn't always free to roam.
No, because it can be bought and licensed
Yeah,
in time
exclusively.
frames exclusively. I just, over time, it'll find, people will stop licensing to that platform if there's no outlet for it. And trust me, this will sort itself out. It's just taking way too long for my household. But yeah, sports is a separate thing because it's stuck in so many contracts that have been written over,
A lot of 10-year deals.
10-year deals.
A lot of
Yeah.
10-year deals.
Which is fascinating, right? That the old arrangement, and its interaction with the new arrangement. One of the questions was, previous questions was, will Scarlett Johansson win her suit?
Yes, I think she will.
Really?
Well, I think they'll settle, but.
So what does it say in the contract? I mean, isn't it a contract question?
It says that she's guaranteed a percent of the net proceeds, but
Right.
then they simultaneously released it streaming, because her
Which hurt
contract
her,
was 5
which hurt
years
her
ago.
net,
What's that?
which damaged her net.
Yeah, damaged her theatrical net. Yeah, they can't piss off Scarlett Johansson. She's really important. She has friends that are really important.
Well, she's Black Widow, for goodness. So anyway.
Well, she's dead as Black Widow. If you say, they killed her off everywhere, you still can't piss her off.
So we've got 5 minutes, I believe.
John Travolta.
Closing arguments. Winners, losers policy by 2025.
I'll do that. I'll do the policy by 25 because we were sort of light on that. I would say the government is slow. The government is regulating things that have happened in the past. These internet fangs, right, that's who they're going after, big tech. So it's really the 4 fangs we've been talking about. They will be too slow. The FANGs are already competing with each other. Every conference call, I mean, Facebook is so mad at Apple. It is amusing to listen to him speak. But anyway, they're all competing with each other already, and no matter what you do, they will outsmart the government. And all they'll do is hurt the next competitor coming in because you add costs to the new entrant that these guys can pay for because they have huge staffs. So I don't think policy has any impact, and I don't think it matters if you let these guys buy new things. If you say, okay, no more acquisitions, that's okay. They can build them from within or do contract deals.
That's the interesting thing about the MGM thing. Why not just license it?
I mean, if the government stops them, that's what they'll do. Or they'll just, you know what I would do if I was Amazon? Forget that. Go and pay 2 times for the Marvel team. The Marvel team is arguably the best storytellers working in Hollywood today. Just go to them. They are individuals. They have contracts. You can buy them out of their contracts. Just give them 3X for human capital. Bring their whole team to you, Amazon. Buy nothing. You're buying people.
Yeah.
And then let them go nuts because you have a deeper pocketbook.
No,
That's the smartest
I
play.
mean, honestly, if you buy an MGM, you're buying their library, is
Right.
what you're buying.
Right.
You're buying,
But why not
but
just
those are
license?
still under contracts. They're
Okay.
existing contracts.
But you have to have government approval.
Yeah. No.
There's
so-
ways to get around
but-
that.
Yeah, but you go in there and you buy MGM, you don't just get that content immediately, move it on to Amazon, whatever, because there are existing contracts with rights out. Now, so maybe you move it all in 3 or 4 years, but, yeah, no,
So-
I don't, I mean, I'm not even gonna try to guess what the policy is in 4 years from now, probably nothing different, based on the.
They do nothing?
Do nothing, I mean, the speed of what we see in government policy creation.
Do we need to do something, or do you think that speed is okay?
I'm a capitalist, I prefer do nothing, so I'm gonna stick with
Gene on
that.
this. No government. let the
I'm not
market
really sure,
decide.
yeah, I think let the
Yeah.
market decide on
She and I
these.
agree 100% on that one.
Yeah, I think we're already doing something. There are investigations, there's litigation, and that will continue to happen. But, and this is just not on antitrust, you're asking about regulation generally, but, you know, the 1890 Sherman Act didn't have a big impact on the market. The 1914 Federal Trade Commission Act didn't have a big impact on the market. And that was Brandeis. We're supposed to be in the new Brandeisian era now. You're gonna see a lot of action. As I say, lawyers are gonna benefit. That's where a lot of that action will be. And there will have some impacts, and, you know, some firm valuations will be affected, but it's hard to see that there's gonna be a fundamental shift in the market because it's these, you know, are different platforms, different products, and you've got lots of market demand driving contractual solutions that can go one form or another, just like has been discussed here. You know, you block this merger, you can do some other licensing agreement and so forth and so on. The market's got a lot of that flexibility that the regulators don't have.
That's true.
I guess, can I ask one more question?
Now we have 1 minute. You're going to go over.
COVID. What changes fundamentally, if anything, about the entertainment industry coming out of COVID? What are the lasting impacts of COVID on media?
NBC overpaid for the Olympics.
Yes. Yes. Ding, ding, ding. That's for sure.
See how smart the economist is?
Yeah.
I mean, clearly, the talent and contracts and windowing of theaters and these SVOD services, I think there'll be durability to that.
I think screen time, acceptable screen time has been redefined. I think parents and their kids were at odds pre-COVID about what is appropriate screen time per day. I think that's all changed because we were on Zoom 10 hours a day for work. And then you went and I think wasn't it you were saying your kid was, maybe it was you, you're screaming, get off your screen and your computer and come down, it was Scott, and come down and watch TV with me. So he's just insisting this kid watch a different screen but not be screenless. So I think the notion of best, you know, and that means more money is going to move to the screens of your choice. We're going to have more screens. And COVID brought us to the 15-year-old. Right? We were just slow to move, and it forced us to come down to the 15-year-old screen time averages. You know, the average iPhone is 5.5 hours a day. So 5.5 hours a day is the average iPhone user's screen time because they keep track.
So I didn't get a chance to say, I think there'll be another service we're talking about that we haven't mentioned yet, just like TikTok came out. Whatever the generation, the end of Z and beginning of A here, when they're 15, there's going to be something different.
Yeah.
And it will get network effects, and it will compete. And Facebook will exist as long as there's old people. But there's going to constantly be new services to the younger people that we may or may not join in on, to their chagrin.
That's true. Yeah, I have a little 20-year-old use Tumblr, which is, I guess, a social media site for non-social media users. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Different target markets.
All right.
Okay.
We end right on time. So Tom, Jean, Laura, thank you so much for
Thank you, Mike.
taking the time. I appreciate it.